WNYC TV presents Barbara Lee Diamondstein and...
Hello, I'm Barbara Lee Diamondstein, and our guest today is Theodore White, the author of 10 books. His latest, In Search of History, has been #1 on the bestseller list in the United States. I assume abroad sooner or later, too. In this book, Mr. White, instead of telling us of the making of the president, has given us a fascinating, rich account of the making of Theodore H. White. If there is a central and recurring question in this eloquent, analytical, and often entertaining memoir, it is, what's it all about? What prompted you to retrace your steps, and what have you discovered?
Let me see if I can answer that one. I was at the beginning of the campaign in 1976, and I had been doing politics by the old formula for 20 years.
What was the old formula?
The old formula was, here are the primaries, here are the bosses, here are the manipulators, here are the media, and then comes the convention, and then here are the guys who flick the votes this way and that way. And the primary in Massachusetts in '76 brought me back to Boston, where I had been born. And so I decided to go back to the ghetto in which I was born, which was a Jewish ghetto then. And it was like bombed out Berlin. It was a horror. And the taxi driver wanted me to pay $10 more to drive me through the street in which I was born in broad daylight. And so many of the boys in that street had gone on to success and comfort. And the street was now a frightening and terrible and dark street with buildings tumbled down. And I suddenly realized that the politics I'd been reporting all my life had nothing at all to do with the real or the underlying politics of the USA. And so I began to go back to ask myself, well, who made this happen? Who makes things happen? Because history, and this is called In Search of History, is a huge detective story. Behind every event or condition, there is something or somebody that caused events to happen. So this is a kind of detective story of my own. What happened to me, and who did it to me? And its story.
What did you discover?
Well, I called it really In Search to describe the hunt. I haven't got the answers yet. I've discovered how often I've been wrong. I've discovered, I think, the importance of the men by trying can change things. Individuals can change things. The individual, the man, the hero, the leader, must, however, happen along at the right time. He must be the intersection of forces and ideas. If Mao Zedong had been born on Mott Street, he would never have become Mao Zedong. If John F. Kennedy had been born 100 years earlier, he would never have become John F. Kennedy. The ideas bubble up by themselves from situations, and one man can take an idea and then ride it through. I think in almost all the men I describe here, there is this desire to impose their will and their idea on all the men around them. And so what did I discover? That it's far more than guns, far more than bombs. It's the ideas in men's mind and how they apply them that make history. That sounds rather pompous. Really, I have no serious answer yet. That's as far as I can go in saying that there's one all-embracing theory.
Well, in your book, there is the evolution of a journalist who has become more conservative. Is that an inevitable progress from youth to wisdom?
No, and I wouldn't call myself a conservative. There are certain things which...
I didn't say a conservative, I said more conservative.
More conservative. I wouldn't even say that. More realistic. Let's take the things I believed in. My father marched in Boston, Massachusetts in the year 1911 at the head of a suffragette parade. He believed, and I was taught, that women were of equal quality as men. I believe that to this day. I think a woman has the right to do what she wants with her body. I consider the pro-life people abhorrent to my politics. I believe in a clean environment more so than ever. I believe in all those social things. I do not believe, however, and our city of New York is a prime example, that you can cure all problems by tossing money at them. I thought John V. Lindsay would be the greatest mayor New York ever had. I admired John. I still do admire John. But there was brains, and there was goodwill, and there was money, and things didn't work.
Why not?
It's because I think the dogma that I once shared with liberals was a totally false dogma. I don't believe you can cure everything by pasting dollar bills over it. Let me see. There is, New York right now is the dumping ground of a series of immigration acts which were badly administered, not badly conceived, badly administered, a series of pressures which converge on us from the outside, which New York attempted in that magnificence it used to have to solve all by itself. New York cannot govern itself, and the sooner we realize that New York is incapable of self-government, well, the farther down the road we'll be to a solution. But that isn't what this book is about. This book is about other countries and other times.
You resisted a moment ago when I said more conservative. Perhaps you would tell us the current state of your liberalism.
I would say that in this day and age, Barbara Lee, for a man to measure himself by a liberal index or a conservative index is absolutely absurd. You ask me a question, I'll tell you what I think. I remember at one point being an editor at Collier's, seeing the picture of a little black boy in Clinton, Tennessee, who was not allowed to go to the school across the street because he was black. That was segregation. That I found that intolerable, that the child should be excluded from a school because of the color of his skin. I still believe the same thing. And if children are excluded, as they are in Boston and in Chicago and in Cleveland, from schools because the color of their skin is white, I object to that too. Now, does that make me liberal or conservative?
Well, during the course of the book, you describe yourself as having wandered all across the political spectrum, and even indicate that you had a certain envy of the political certainties of some of your...
That's true enough. Now, let's say in this book, what I know makes this book somewhat controversial. I cannot help but recognize that I misread Dwight D. Eisenhower. I wrote of him as a do-nothing, slothful president. I now recognize that we had, as soon as he had knocked off Joe McCarthy, he gave us 6 of the best years of American life in this century, unbroken peace. When he pulled a military invasion of Lebanon, he knocked off that Middle East situation in 3 weeks without the loss of a single life, and the Marines were in and the Marines were out just like that. He was a quiet and placid president, and oh, how I wish we could have those 6 Eisenhower years back again.
I thought the American people always got what they really needed. Perhaps that's not what we need right now.
I don't think we really needed Richard Nixon, and I don't really think that we needed the war in Vietnam. We don't always get what we really need. When I speak of these things in search of history, there's also this immense quality of accident. I was there in Yan'an, and I tried to tell about the first meeting with the Chinese communists, where we sat...
Why don't you tell us for a moment the first time that you went to China as a 23-year-old Harvard graduate, protege of that eminent scholar John Fairbank. How did you ever get to China at age 23, just about 40 years ago?
Well, that's... I can do that in the Chinese phrase. The Chinese say that the longest a journey begins with a single step. In my case, the single step was across a corridor at Harvard College. I was a scholarship student there. I had a study in Boylston Hall on Saturday afternoons when it was rainy and wintry and cold. The place smelt of our raincoats and overcoats, and I would sneak out of the library at Boylston Hall because there was another library totally unused just across the corridor, and that was the library of the Harvard Yenjing Institute. And so I walked across the corridor to find an empty library where I could sneak history books into the Chinese library. And I became interested, and they looked so different. And I pulled them off the wall, and they come with these little ivory hooks and in blue covers, and rice paper smells differently from our wood pulp paper, and the books smell differently. And I thought that I'd take a course in Chinese, see if I could learn how to read them. And
Do you
that was
relate
how
to
I
your own
happened to
fluency in Hebrew and your own Hebrew education?
I wasn't thinking in those terms at all.
Well, the iconography, the calligraphy.
Well, it's totally different. I can think of no two cultures more different than the Hebrew culture, in which I was so schooled and so educated, and the Chinese culture, which I attempted to learn at Harvard. They're totally, all along the way, of course, I had been forced through Latin at the Boston Latin School, and I picked up quite a few languages by then, and thought I'd pick up the Chinese just for fun. And so about 3 years later, I was in Chungking, and there were bombs being dropped by the Japanese, and it seemed to me as if I didn't want to be a history professor, which I'd started out to be, but with the war going on, and there was a woman who was blown through my room. I could only tell that she was a woman because the actual cadaver still had its breast on them. And I was horrified. And I gave up being a scholar almost at that point and decided to become a reporter and stayed. And then 7 years later, I was on board the Missouri, and the Japanese was surrendering, and you don't want to go all through my life, which is all here if you want.
But you talk about the accents, the lucky accents of history that permitted you to be the right person at the right place as well, like aboard the Missouri.
Oh, Lord. Barbara Lee. I am no Marxist or determinist. I guess I'd be more an accidentalist than anything else. I have had so much luck, and so many good accidents have happened to me along the way that I'm afraid every morning when I wake that the luck will have run out. I had the accident of being born in Boston, of being given a newsboy scholarship to Harvard, and then accidentally I was given this I'll tell that story, and then
Please tell it.
There's the Frederick Sheldon Traveling Fellowship. Some New England eccentric about the turn of the century left a huge sum of money, from which the income of which would be used to choose one graduating senior every year. Only the man who received the Frederick Sheldon Traveling Fellowship had to promise neither to work nor to study during the entire year and spend the entire year outside the USA traveling, broadening himself by travel. One of those wonderful, eccentric bequests. What nice accident could a man have happen to him?
And you did that.
I did that, and that was how that really was how I got to China. And then
In Search of History, you make mention of your revisiting China with Richard Nixon, but you do that only briefly. Do you intend to go back? And if so, what do you think you'd find there now?
Oh yes, I want to go back. They aren't, or they haven't until recently, been very welcoming to people who speak Chinese or who have been there before. I don't know whether I could learn much in China now. There is going on in China at the moment this immense power struggle. And it's a struggle like sea monsters beneath the surface of the ocean. And the only way you can tell a struggle is going on is by a bubble that pops to the surface here or there. They have killed each other. They've imprisoned each other. I think of the Chinese communists, and I suppose when I say I've traveled the entire spectrum, as they were in 1944 when I was in Yan'an, the cave capital during the war. And on Saturday night, they had a dance. And they would all dance with each other. Judor, the commander-in-chief of all the armies, would sit there with his wife, and they would rock to the music. It was like a Jewish grandfather and Jewish grandmother at a Jewish wedding. And then Ye Jianying, the chief of staff, had a little 3-year-old girl, and she was there also, and she'd be hugging onto people's knees. And Lin Biao would waltz, and Ye Jianying would tango, and they had a paper-covered comb and a harmonica and a violin and a drum, and they went thump, 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 and they went waltz, waltz, waltz. And these dances were just as much fun as a YMCA summer camp. And they loved each other. They were fighting both the Japanese and Chiang Kai-shek in that comradeship of the guerrillas, of an underground army, of a guerrilla army. They'd become soul brothers. Since then, they've killed each other. Lin Biao was shot down in a plane trying to escape. Peng Dehuai is, whether he's dead or alive, we don't know. Power, you see, has got to them. And they are fighting now. The few survivors of that long march, of that Yan'an experience, are struggling among themselves for power, just like ordinary mortals do. If I've learned anything, you say, what have I learned? How have I come? My progression is that idealists and heroes and liberals, like fascists and conservatives, ultimately become corrupted by power and then are carried along by the law of unintended consequences to the same cruelties of which they have accused their enemies. There was never a generation in American life more attractive than the kids of the 1960s. You know, the student, the peace kids. Oh my, how wonderful they were. And I have seen them move into politics and become as corrupt and ambitious and career-seeking. You were probably one of the kids of the 1960s yourself, Barbara Lee Diamondstein.
But I'm not corrupt or career-seeking.
I'm sure you're not corrupt. As for career-seeking, what's wrong with that? What is wrong with
Yes, I am career-seeking.
Yes.
You're quite right.
But unless politics change, your question was, would I like to go back to China? I would love to see again those sites that I've spent so much time with the reader in describing here in this book.
That's the other amazing part. What a wonderful travel writer you are, too.
Well, you come over the crest of a hill, and on the far crest you see a Chinese temple with those curled flip roofs arched against the gray sky. You never forget the Chinese place their temples by a system they call feng shui, which I'm not going to explain to you, but it's a very beautiful way of siting and locating a temple. Or being at moonlight in a courtyard with ducks paddling in a Buddhist temple, or to say nothing of how beautiful Chinese children and Chinese ladies can be, or the gorges of the Yangtze. Yes, I'd love to go back. I'll try to go back. I will go back. But whether I can learn any more about the China of today than the deep sea driver, I don't know. I've described the roots of today's China, but where it goes from here, don't know.
Among the things you tell us in Search of History, there are many observations and many conclusions about the future direction of our country. What distresses you the most?
You're asking me this. Well, I'm still recovering from the shock of the Johnstown episode.
The cult killings in Vienna.
The cult killings, and suddenly I am sensitized to all the cults and all the murders in Los Angeles' Skid Row, the killing of San Francisco's mayor, the killing of the children in Indiana. These things, I think, all stem from the oddest combination of American absolutism and American tolerance. And what worries me is most is our tendency to apply absolute solutions to practically every problem going. We are going to have the biggest bomb and the best bomb. We're going to have the biggest nuclear carrier and the best nuclear carriers. I guess Carter's vetoed that. But we are going to have more money. Will make this school the best school. There's an absolutism that I find disturbing. In my youth, I found it magnificent. I wanted total destruction of the Japanese and the Germans. I think I still hold to that. I find Americans...
There were simpler judgments.
Well, they were mean people.
That's why I was in it.
They were very simple judgments. I feel that war in Vietnam was probably leaving aside the morality of it, was probably the most mismanaged war in American history. I think if we had said
Is it our watershed? Is it the end of the American era? The beginning of the end of the American era?
Oh, you'll have to ask that question of some young man 50 years from now. Only he can tell what's the end and what's the beginning. I know what I can give you the beginning where it all starts. If we have
We do have a moment, surely.
probably the most exciting day I ever spent was being on board the battleship Missouri the day the Japanese surrendered. A gray day, a foggy day, and just as the clouds broke, there came this buzzing and zooming and roaring, and over the horizon you saw a long line of B-29 just like that. And as the B-29s came over us, 1,500 of our own fleet carrier planes rose to greet them. And then it was the greatest air armada ever assembled, and then they just came down on top of us and zoomed over the Missouri, and then they turned inland over Tokyo, which they had leveled flat, and Yokohama, which they had leveled flat, and they brandished American power all over that Tokyo Bay, and the Japanese crawled, having signed the document of surrender, crawled off the battleship Missouri to the sound, to that roar in their ears, and to them it must have been terrifying. We held the whole world in our hand that day, except within the Soviet Union, no plane flew anywhere in the entire world without the permission of the American Air Force.
Is that a good idea?
That was the beginning. That was the beginning of the... You asked me, is this the end of the American era? I'm saying I can't tell you about the end. I can say that the beginning of that era of American total dominance, our belief that we could solve anything, that we would go walk on the moon, that we would rebuild Europe, that we could clean up the ghettos.
Does any of that optimism remain?
You mean politically or in me? Politically, you can always win by promising more. I think the country is beginning to be a little bit more skeptical of that, of the everlasting promise. Yes, there's a basic optimism left. If you don't believe that we can learn to live together in America peacefully, you might just as well go out and commit suicide right now. We certainly haven't solved it in the civil rights debate of the past 20 years. We have made the cities black and the suburbs white, and a trend that continues and terrifies me. But if you don't believe that we're going to live together, then let's do that to ourselves. Let's make a Jonestown of the whole thing. I do believe there is a basic optimism in me that we can learn how to make our cities livable again, that we can learn to control our environment, that we can have full employment without this desperate inflation that's going on right now. I'm, you might call me doggedly optimistic. I refuse to be otherwise.
You've covered the presidential campaigns for 4 different campaigns and then chose not to.
6. Go ahead.
But I meant the books
right,
as
yes,
well.
That's
6
right,
campaigns,
that's right.
but 4 makings of the president.
I was boasting. I apologize to you.
No,
and to the
you're
audience.
you're more accurate, an accurate reporter, always. I'm thinking of how your perceptions evolved in the one making of the president that you did not write about. And that is, what has happened to your perception of Jimmy Carter from the time of his campaign through this juncture of his presidency? How have your perceptions evolved? How would you evaluate his performance at this point? And, while we're at it, his chances for 1980.
Chances for 1980 are also quite good. It's taken him longer to learn the job of president than almost any other man I've seen in the spot.
How do you explain that?
I think his background was so far detached, so remote from the real systems of American power. His handling of the economy was that of a man who grew peanuts in Plains, Georgia.
And his handling of the Congress?
It is like a man who learned about legislative politics by handling the Georgia legislature. But he is smart, he is sturdy. I think above all, he's honest. He's had to learn the lesson of every president that you can't trust your best friends. That I think I'm rather doggedly optimistic about Jimmy Carter, too.
Describe for us, if you will, a 1980 scenario. Will any single issue dominate the election?
There are always 3 issues in every American election. They change their names. There's always the issue of bread and butter, war and peace, and black and white. Now, what's the issue going to be? The issue is going to be, bread and butter is going to be called inflation. Inflation worries this country sick. The urban problem is the black and white problem right now. We have to learn how to live together. War and peace, well, golly, I think if he can settle the Middle East and calm that down, and if China doesn't blow up on us, he gets full marks on that. There are other social issues coming along that really begin to worry me. The pro-life people remind me very much of the prohibition people, the single-issue people who are in there. You know, the dominant issue in American politics from 1880 to 1918 was prohibition, whether you should allow people to drink alcohol or not. We may have that as an aberrant issue in 1980. But basically, inflation, foreign policy, peace, war.
What stories would you most like to cover in the next 10 years?
Well, you mentioned one. I'd like to go back to China. I'd like to cover the Mount Sinai. When eventually peace comes in the Middle East, I'd like to be there to take a look at it. I don't think I want to cover any more wars. I've done all the wars I want to in that book. And they're very exciting for young men.
How about minor skirmishes like presidential elections?
They're going to take place more and more in studios. I'll be out on the road watching the crowds yell. I do like that.
But I would assume that the advent, particularly in the last decade, of television has changed your work considerably.
It has. It's no longer there, really. The crowd merely provides scenery and stage setting for the candidate. So much more of it is that little clip they take of the candidate in the crowd, and they show it to you for 60 seconds
commercial.
with the commercial message on it.
So then you don't hold to that Tip O'Neill view that all politics is the neighborhood in the end.
No. His politics are... television can't help anybody, any congressman get elected in New York unless he spends $2 million at it. Most congressmen in New York City rest upon the neighborhood vote, but some of them spend $1 million or so. But you go out there in Queens and Biaggi and Adabo, those people aren't paying $1 million to get elected. They rely upon neighborhood connections. Above that is the realm of TV.
In Search of History, which has received some of the most warm, filled with praise reviews of any book that I've seen or read in a long while, including one reviewer who called it this generation's Lincoln Steffens autobiography. You've been on television shows, you've been interviewed, you've been every place. In the course of all of this, as the kind of experienced journalist, an institution yourself, and that's another question, what does it feel like to be an institution? Sort of the pulse of the American political process.
Well, on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Friday, it feels good.
Pretty good.
Tuesday,
Today's
Thursday,
Tuesday,
Saturday,
though. No. But you've been asked so many questions in so many places. What are some of the most interesting or the best that you've been asked during the course of all of this, turning the role around, interviewing the interviewer?
You've asked practically, you've asked the outstanding questions. They mostly ask, what was so-and-so like? What was Mao Zedong really like? What was Stilwell really like? What was John F. Kennedy really like?
To find those answers, please read In Search of History by Theodore H. White, who has proved today that he is informative and provocative in person, as he always is in print. Thank you, Teddy White, for being with us. I'm Barbara Lee Diamonstein, and thank you, audience, for being with us, too.
Thank you, Barbara Lee, for letting me.